How much money should you put down on your house? Should you pay it cash if you can? Should you get a loan? Should you always leverage it? Should you pay it off faster? These are questions that come up all the time. There's really no right or wrong answer, but I thought it would be interesting to take a look at an opportunity cost that you may want to consider if you're going to put a huge down payment or you're going to pay cash for your house. This is an area where I think a lot of people make mistakes. And again, not one size fits all. Everybody has different amount of assets in the bank. They have different retirement plans ahead of them. Some people have pensions and things that are going to supplement their retirement, so they don't need this big pile of cash. But I think it's interesting to at least explore the idea of, what if your money is doing something for you? What if it's invested in other markets where it's making more interest, it's compounding over time? Is that better than wiping out the mortgage, right? We're all afraid of the interest. That's usually where this comes from. Most people are scared of paying too much in the way of interest. So I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at it. I'm going to share a screen with you so we can show a couple of quick examples of how this works, and then we'll decide whether or not it's going to be in your best interest to put a lot down, pay it all cash, put a little bit down, leverage, that sort of thing. So, and I think all this has to do with your specific age too. So if you're a little bit on the younger side of things, if you're in your 30s, maybe early 40s, you've got a lot of time on your side. So you have time for the markets to compound for you. You also have times for the markets to fall apart and then recover. That's one major concern, is I don't want to have my money tied up in the markets and have them fall apart, especially later in life. So as you get a little closer to that retirement age, maybe you want to be more conservative with your allocation and where those funds are actually parked. And maybe it makes sense to put more money down on the mortgage so you don't have that big, heavy mortgage, because a lot of us want to retire without the mortgage payment. But remember, you're just getting rid of the principal and interest. You still are going to have property taxes. You'll still have insurance. And so I think when we see that entire mortgage payment in front of us with property taxes and insurance, we just make the quick conclusion that that whole thing is going to go away, when in reality, it's just the principal and interest. So in this example, let's take a look and assume that somebody's buying a house for 300 grand. Now, if you're on the West Coast, this is probably not reality for you. There's not a lot of places where you can go and buy for 300,000, but we lend all over the place, and there's plenty of states that have some really good opportunity for 300. So I'm just going to use it for three. We could do the same thing for 500 or a million. You're going to get the same results. So just follow with me. We'll use 300 grand as a sample. So $300,000, we're going to take in this scenario 20% down. We want to get rid of the mortgage insurance. We just want to focus in on what's the principal and interest cost over a full 30-year period. And we're going to assume 6.5% interest. Now, it's not the lowest it's been in the last 30 years, and it's certainly not the lowest that it'll be in the next 30 years, but we're just going to make the quick assumption that that's the best rate you're ever going to get, 6.5%. You never refi. You're going to stick with that for the entire 30 years. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. Let's jump over here to this screen and look at the amortization chart. So when we pull this up, you'll see that your payment is $1516.96. So that's your payment each and every month. Now, month number one, and in the early years, you pay a ton of money toward interest. Very little is going to principal. So in this breakdown, you can see here, month number one, it's 6.5%. On a $240,000 loan, you're paying $216 to principal. You're knocking that loan down at $216, not very much. Interest is $1,300. And so your total interest month number one is $1,300. Now, what everybody's worried about is how much I'm paying over the life of the loan. So let's just assume you're going to make the bare minimum payment. You're never paying any additional to principal. You're going to pay it off in the full 30 years according to schedule, and you're never going to refinance. So let's drop all the way down here to 360 months. Now, at the 360 month mark, you can see this down here, 306,109. So $306,000, 109. That's how much money in interest you would pay on that original $240,000 loan. So that seems really scary because you're borrowing 240 grand and you're paying back just in interest. You got to pay back the 240 plus 306,109 in interest. And that's where most people, they just hit pause. I don't want to get the interest. I don't want to pay all that back. It feels like a ripoff. But I want to challenge you to look at the opportunity cost of that same amount of money. Let's just take a look real quick. Let's say that we paid cash for that house. We avoid the $300,000 in interest. And we actually start off, I'm going to use this calculator right here, with our $300,000 sitting in an investment account. Now we're going to let it grow for 30 years. And we're going to assume the rate of return is going to be somewhere around, let's just say annually, we're going to get 8%. Now the S&P 500 has been over the last 100 years, been well over 10%. But let's just take a conservative approach and say 8. That's going to give us, it's going to account for some ups and downs. There's some years and months that are going to be up, some are going to be down. We'll use 8% for right now. So at the end of 30 years, because we didn't want to pay $300,000 in interest, we're basically losing out on $3 million. So you can see this nice ramp up. Now, this is a consistent, so there are obviously some dips and valleys that would look different in your own portfolio if you did a full 30-year look, because there's going to be some years that you're cranking out 16, 18% returns, and some years you're going to be down to 4%, or you're going to be underwater 8%, right? It's going to balance out. So this slope is just giving you an account at an 8% return, $3 million. If we did it off the 100-year average at 10, it's 5.2 million. I think that's a little bit aggressive. Maybe there's some opportunities there if you're working with a really good wealth advisor. Let's just stay at the 8 for right now. So for me, if I see that over the 30 years, like I'm okay paying $300,000 in interest in exchange for having a balance of $3 million in the bank. And there's obviously a crossover point where, this money, this interest over time is going to far exceed what you owe on your mortgage. So the concern is, like, if I pay for my mortgage and something happens, at least my housing's taken care of. But I would also argue, if you have a really good account with, and it's spinning off like really good interest, that money, that interest, you could easily draw down on it. You may have some capital gains you have to pay, but you could draw down on that money to make your mortgage payment at the very least, right? So if something happened to you, you're still covered, right? We're using our asset and our growth in our asset to cover that debt. So I think that's worth considering. Now, remember, in this scenario, this was assuming we paid 100% cash for the house, or we financed and we still put a down payment. So let's actually go back here, and the difference, remember that we needed $60,000, 20% down in that $300,000 purchase. So let's adjust this to $240,000 and we leave it in the bank, because that's really a more realistic approach. So using those same numbers, 8% over 30 years, an annualized average return, it's 2.4 million. So it does swing the numbers a little bit. This is actually more accurate because we actually only have 240 to play with. We're already going to use 60 of that money that we're going to apply for the down payment. We're going to leverage the rest of it by having it invested somewhere. So I wanted to show you this because I run into a lot of clients who are so afraid of the monthly mortgage payment that they're willing to put big chunks down, not always paying cash for their house, but I've seen people put $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 down in their home. They have other assets, so they're not depleting all of their money, but they're so afraid of the interest in the mortgage, when in reality, if that money was still growing for them over time, it may actually be more beneficial to keep it in another account. I'd also argue it's a little bit more safe because, again, you can draw down on that if you need to, if something happened to you, versus having it all in your home. One of the risks that I see is when somebody has it all in their home and something happens to them financially. Maybe they need a large chunk of money, they lose a job, there's a big health need that's going to have require a big capital investment from them. They got to go back to the house. They got to remortgage it. They got to pull a HELOC or put a new loan on it at some point down that road. And they're going to have a harder time qualifying in some cases if they don't have the employment. So I remember vividly seeing a client who ran into this exact same scenario where they put a very large amount of money down. Life seemed good. They chose a 15-year loan, so they were committed to that higher payment. The goal was just to pay it off as fast as possible. And on the surface, it seemed like a really good move, except they were a little bit cash light in other accounts. Didn't really like the stock market, didn't feel real comfortable with that, left a little bit of money in cash in the bank. So they didn't deplete all their money when they put the down payment, but they were so worried about that monthly that they wanted to get that number to a specific monthly payment. It required a good chunk down. So fast forward about 5 years later, they had both lost their jobs. They lost their jobs for a significant period of time, so much so that they needed cash to live off of, to pay for groceries and food and insurance and things like that. So they were going, all right, what do we do? And that's how they got back in touch with us. We didn't really have any options for them because we didn't have any income to support a loan against that house. So here they are with, in this case, I think they were 600 grand worth of equity in their house, but we couldn't use it for anything because we couldn't get into it. We couldn't unlock it because we didn't have the resources required to get a loan. And so there was the risk. Now, if they would have kept that money in another investment account, maybe chose a 30-year loan instead of a 15 out of the gate, They could have paid a little bit extra to the mortgage if they truly wanted to pay it off fast. They could do that, but they had this chunk of money growing for them over here. They could have drawn down on it in that particular scenario to make their mortgage payments, right? They could have opted out of the aggressive 15-year repayment plan because their minimum term was a 30-year loan. They could have opted to take the 30-year payment for those 6, 8, 9 months that they were out of work, drawn down on this investment account to help float them and get them by. And that's an area that I think would be something worth considering. We never predict that something bad is going to happen, but we run into it all the time. We run into situations with clients where life just sort of happens. And when it does, it's usually unexpected. Very rarely do we predict we're going to lose a job in 8 years or our income is going to be significantly cut in 8 years. It's usually unexpected. So the lesson behind all of this is just before you put a huge amount of money down or before you buy your house cash, I think you need to make sure you've got all the rest of your buckets completely full. So the retirement bucket is totally full. You're properly insured, whole life or a term policy, something that's going to properly insure you or your family if something bad were to happen. And then also make sure you have plenty of liquid reserves for the unexpected. You're kind of running out of places to park this cash. And then that last section would be to pay down the mortgage or pay it off, buy one in cash, etc. This is especially important for people right now who are looking to potentially exit out of one property with a significant amount of money and maybe buy another home. Maybe they're downsizing. It's very rare that people have 250, 300, 400, $500,000 in one shot to do something with. And so a lot of times for that individual, that exit, that sale of that property liquidates them with enough cash. All they know is to put it down on the new mortgage, but they need to consider some other options. This is why we highly, highly suggest before you get to that place, you should meet with a wealth advisor at the very least. You should hopefully have somebody in your team that you're meeting with before, but if not, before you just throw all that cash on your mortgage, let's make sure it's the appropriate plan for you and the best use of that money. Hopefully this helps you. I know this is a concept that's kind of touchy because some people subscribe to the not carry any debt and pay everything off super fast. I think there can be a healthy blend between the two. Certainly wouldn't want to put somebody in a really stressful place from month number one. And you could do these kind of scenarios where you say, I paid the house off cash, but now since I don't have a mortgage, I've got all that money I could put into, and let it build up over time. We could run those scenarios as well. But remember, you still had that monthly mortgage payment. In this case, it was $1,500 and some change. And we had this other money growing for us. It's grown at a significant pace that's quicker and better served for our immediate future. So anyways, hopefully this helps you. Let me know if you have any questions. If you ever want to build a plan like this, super fun on our side to build it out. We can look at it a couple of different ways. And we've run into some clients situationally where it makes more sense to put more money down for them, maybe a unique set of circumstances, or like I said, the assets are so heavy in another bucket that they don't need to build another plan. What I find with most families is that they put way more than they need to down in the mortgage. They end up with most of their wealth tied up in equity, and they're a little short in other areas. And then when life happens, the unexpected happens, it causes a lot of pain. All right, guys, until next time, we'll talk to you soon.